Masculinity is at the center of what can only be described as a cultural war right now. Between people denouncing the entire concept as toxic and those trying to reclaim it, there is a lot to be said about the topic, so much so that I'm fairly certain this video will not be enough to cover it all. But since the idea of what being a man constitutes is so interesting in my eyes, I don't mind making this a series. Today, I want to offer a broad discussion on masculine archetypes and their importance, using the show Grappler Baki as a way to narrow down the scope of this discourse, that will be focusing mainly on male power fantasies and the mythification of masculinity that they perpetuate through narration. I selected this show because 1, it's great, and 2, it's so dripping with testosterone that the only way to grab the volumes without developing fur mittens is to wear Kevlar gloves. And just like that, there goes our first point: testosterone. Why did I just make that connection? Well, the answer is simple. To be a man is to produce male hormones. These hormones, in return, make your body more androgenic, giving you all of the characteristics of a male: pilosity, muscles, height, square jaw and shoulders, low voice, aggressivity, etc., etc. These traits are gifts from nature, and their cyclical resurgence is what allows masculinity to rest on a base more solid than ideology alone, as they aren't going anywhere. Stemming from them were created nurture-based qualities, aiming to complete the picture of the perfect man, as instincts alone aren't enough to create him. If one or the other is missing, male identity is incomplete. Here, we see that masculinity works on two fronts, both mental and physical, with the two being interconnected and taking source from the same place: biology. This means that a manga focused on representing masculinity would need to showcase extremely buff and combative characters. And that's exactly what Baki does. Regardless of your identity, you will be able to resonate with the story, simply because there's bound to be a character you'll recognize yourself in. This is the male power fantasy trope in full effect. In every piece of fiction, we tend to scan for people that look like us in order to be able to project ourselves into the story. This is known as representation. However, some shows take that to the next level by showing you not who you are, but who you wish you could be. These are male power fantasies. Without them, we wouldn't be here. They are the soil in which male identity blossoms. It might sound extreme, especially to the people who have a bone to pick with masculinity, but the truth is that the codification of what it means to be a man is what has led the world to be what it is today, with literature playing an integral role in allowing this vital information to not only be shared, but also survive through time. After all, while being a male is first and foremost a biological reality, there's no denying that a large portion of it also comes down to cultural standards, which aren't exactly innate traits. Instead, we learn how to behave according to masculine standards thanks to our environment, be it via oral transmission or books of written tradition that serve not only as a guiding beacon, but also as a permanent lighthouse, left there to inspire future generations. For us, the children of modernity, this is our main pathway to access masculinity, since, and let's be honest, the generations of men that precede us have been nothing but disappointing, and are mostly to blame for the decrepitude of the modern man. Sadly, we can't really count on Western media to salvage this shit show either, considering that it has stopped celebrating our cultures decades ago and is now entirely focused on destroying as many of our values as possible. This is because the West has entered the age of deconstruction. Everything must be questioned, and anything that doesn't align with the bleached out blemish of modern morality must be deconstructed for the greater good. And since there isn't anything more vital to our societies than masculinity, it is therefore no surprise that this concept would attract the ire of the beast. always under the cover of progressivism and global equality. Acting as a stabilizing force, the masculine traditions of a country end up being its last bastion of protection when under attack. Something that explains the constant bombardment the concept has been under. They're not attacking you, they're attacking who you are, telling you that both you and the community would be better off if masculinity were to die. In this dire situation, we need male power fantasies more than ever, to bolster the strength of the modern male, but also to make sure that those who have yet to come will be placed in the right hands. If you think that men are pathetic now, wait until you see what an entire generation that will have grown without masculine role models will look like. They'll be either ultra-aggressive, low self-control baboons, or pacified pansies with no balls to speak of. This is another misconception about masculinity that needs to be refuted. The goal of such a social construct isn't to breed dangerously unhinged males that would pose a threat to society. If anything, it does the exact opposite. In a sense, this is the distinction that the words toxic masculinity tries to capture. If some of it is bad, then by default, some of it must also be good. This nuance completely escapes the vapid minds of those that use the term, persuaded that manhood in its entirety is a nuisance to be ridden of. In reality, there is only one thing that can oppose the violence and mayhem of which masculinity often gives birth to, and that's masculinity itself. To prevent chaos from taking over, we must make sure that masculinity is always in stock, and to do that, we need instruction manuals, under the form that will be the easiest to consume for our little brothers, in this case, anime and manga. I would prefer to offer a video essay centered around the Odysseus, but the truth of the matter is that in this war against degeneracy, refusing to use the weapons of the enemy would be a mistake. We get targeted through the media, so be it. We will use the media to fire back. And in that aspect, there is nothing more effective than Japanese neketsu shonen. These stories are for the most part always centered around a young male protagonist, narrating his physical and spiritual progression with no regards for political correctness or inclusivity. This is where Baki anime comes into play. As the hero of the eponym manga, he is the male power fantasy from which masculine values will be vehiculated to the audience. His journey and encounters serving as a parable. Whichever message you can receive from the narration will be shown to you, not told, which is obligatory for the transmission of masculine tradition to proceed. If I tell you that you must be loyal, respectful and sincere, it might stick to you for a day or two, but chances are you'll never actually integrate these values. This is where the hero's journey comes into play. By showing instead of telling, the story places you at center stage, allowing your own subjectivity to project itself onto the characters, gaining your involvement and attention. Through watching Jack, you will learn of the dangers of excess. Through watching Katsumi, you will come to understand the downfall of arrogance. And through watching Baki, you will get to experience the evolution of a boy seeking to become a man. This means that it cannot start as a fearless mountain of muscles, as that be counterproductive. The reader needs to identify with Baki, and so he has to start young and small, which is why the story begins when he's only 13, to give you a chance to put yourself in his shoes and grow alongside him. And why exactly is he trying to grow? Well, to become stronger, meaning more apt to defend himself and others from the threats of his word. In the series, the personification of that danger is Yujiro Hanma, who also happens to be the father of the hero. an obvious metaphor that represents the birth of positive masculinity as a response to its negative counterpart. That topic will require its own video to decorticate, as the opposition between positive and negative masculinity traits is central to the construction of male identity. For today, let's just say that if masculinity is a dragon, it is one that we must all confront. And in Grappler Baki's universe, it is reincarnated as the strongest creature on Earth. Naturally, this means that Baki isn't the only one to have his sights set on the serpent, as every fighter in the show will sooner or later try their hand at defeating the ogre, which they always fail to do. By definition, you cannot best paroxysmic masculinity, you can only measure yourself to it. And by doing so, you reinforce your own masculine essence, in the hope of one day coming out on top. If that were to happen, you wouldn't be destroying it, you'd simply replace it, becoming the new target that men everywhere would shoot for in order to prove themselves. Through that trope, we understand three things. 1. That masculinity is built through confrontation. 2. That the creation of positive male role models is only made possible by the existence of negative ones. And 3. That the very perpetuation of masculine traits is a cyclical process that finds its roots in the antagonistic yet complementary nature of father-son relationships. One dominates, the other topples. This is what makes the world go round. It's no wonder why many books and movies utilize this opposition in their depiction of the hero's journey. The easiest way to convey the struggles the main character will have to surmount is by giving them a familiar face, one that is either set up as a proper model to follow or an example of what not to do in order to be a good man. In Baki's case, it's both. Yujiro is an abusive tyrant, yes, but he's also a formidable warrior, leaving his son to juggle with contradicting emotions between hatred and respect. Despite spending the entirety of the series trying to separate his identity from that of his father, he still has him as the main objective that dictates his life choices, showing that male power fantasies work on both a positive and negative front. As such, it would be ridiculous to say that toxic masculinity is bad, since without it, positive masculinity wouldn't exist at all, as it is born from a necessity for balance. Throughout his battles, Baki faces plenty of villains, all representing different facets of masculinity, which echo with the inner turmoil agitating our hero. Just like the labors of Hercules, each new challenge can be interpreted on a spiritual level, with success signifying victory not just against an enemy, but most importantly over the self. One can, for example, cite the bout against Anayama, which is a shonen rewriting of David vs. Goliath, with its lesson being relatively evident, or the Yasha Ape encounter, which delves more into the surmounting of primal fears. In both cases, the necessary masculine attributes needed to survive these challenges are expressed through symbols, which is often the case for male power fantasies. At first glance, it might look like two hunks of muscle throwing haymakers at one another, but the real importance of these battles is to be found in the messages that they transmit. The essence of chaos versus the spirit of order, one only existing as a response to the other. This subtlety, juxtaposed with the apparent barbarism of the peregrination needed to own one's own masculinity, is the reason for all the criticism coming its way. Often, the people hell-bent on deconstructing the makeup of male identity aren't men themselves, which explains their inability to see underneath the facade of brutality. To them, if it's ruthless and bloody, it's bad, because hurting people is mean. This is a typical feminine mindset, as one only gets to be this naive when entirely sheltered from the reality of violence, a privilege that is bestowed upon them by the graces of masculine protection. Paradoxically, by trying to destroy toxic masculinity, these people end up getting rid of the only thing standing between them and a sucker punch. In the world of Baki, that invisible barrier is more tenuous, and as people often get beat up or gored, it is incumbent upon the hero to grow that much stronger to make up for it. This is a message to the modern man. As the world around you turns harsh, you have to become harsher, because if you don't, you won't be able to protect what is precious to you. Realizations such as this one are a common occurrence in Baki's life, who went through several tragedies involving the loss of a loved one. First, the Yasha ape, then his mother, both at the hands of, you guessed it, Yujiro Hanma. If you're not tough enough to defeat him, the big bad wolf will eat your family. That is the lesson being taught here. At no point is this assessment turned into an acknowledgement of failure, and our hero is always revolted and invigorated by those deaths, that he seeks to avenge with righteous anger. This shows one thing: in male power fantasies, violence is never normalized. Rather, it is always used either as a tool to combat itself, or as a method to prepare for its inevitable occurrence. If Baki characters fight, it's not because they like it. They simply understand that this is what it takes to survive. Contending doesn't make one mean, it simply makes you normal. Those that try to escape the cycle of confrontation are the abnormal ones, for they seek to evade nature itself. In Baki, everyone fights because everyone lives unsheltered from reality. The members of the cast aren't cruel, they're simply competing against one another to affirm their existence. The men that don't are ridiculed, often depicted pissing on themselves or cowering away. An exaggeration that conveys a very simple message: don't be a wimp. Being weak isn't virtuous, and it certainly isn't a healthy identity to cultivate. As a man that cannot defend himself will soon see his self-respect wither away and die. This type of aggressive normalization is often decried as abject bullying, when it is in fact an act of kindness, one that aims to guide men that have started to believe that weakness could be a strength, and who are suffering from it. Too frequently, men will compromise masculinity by seeking to find in it the aspects that should be shunned or taken away. Thus, they try to only keep the nice and ditch the mean, which is exactly what a work of deconstruction entails. To take apart a concept, ignorant of the fact that it was functioning precisely because it was the sum of two parts. Ancient masculinity wasn't toxic, it was whole. This is what made it great. If Baki is so efficient in sharing this message, it's because it espouses every facet of it, giving the reader a fantasized view of what it means to be a man via Baki's character arc, which at all times presents strength as a virtuous trait to possess. The show highlights the time the hero spends on becoming a man, instead of debating about what it means, as this reality cannot be told, only shown. This compels you to action. Being a male isn't only about what you are, but also what you do. You were given the blueprints to masculinity. Now it's time to act on it, or else it will stay a fantasy forever. And as you fully accomplish yourself, and your identity blooms, you will in turn become a male power fantasy for others to follow. For our ancestors, our brothers, and those to come, it is our duty